So what is going on with jury trials? Because we obviously had that memo last week that said that they were going to be scrapped in all but the most serious cases. What's happening?
Well, you're right to start with the backlog. If a woman is sadly raped in our country today, she will likely have her trial come on in 2028, maybe 2029. That's a long time for her to wait. Victims of rape are pulling out, 60% are pulling out of cases, witnesses fall away, and the trauma of waiting is too hard. We asked Sir Brian Leveson to look at this issue and do a review, and he looked in depth at what we should do. He said there's no magic bullet. We need reform of the system and made some recommendations. We need investment, of course, in our courts.
There are moments in politics when a minister's incompetence becomes so glaring, so undeniable, that no amount of spin or deflection can hide the truth from public view. This is one of those moments. Justice Secretary David Lammy appeared on Good Morning Britain in what can only be described as one of the most uncomfortable interviews a cabinet minister has endured in recent memory, and what he revealed should alarm every single person in this country. Prisoners are being accidentally released from custody, not one or two isolated incidents that might be excused as administrative errors in a complex system. 12 prisoners wrongly released since November alone. 12. And 2 of them are still at large, wandering our streets because the Justice Secretary presides over a prison system so catastrophically mismanaged that it cannot even keep track of who should be behind bars and who should be free. Welcome to UK Posthug, where we expose the incompetence and dysfunction that the mainstream media tries to bury. Make sure you subscribe for daily analysis that reveals what the political establishment desperately does not want you to see. Because what you are about to discover goes far beyond simple administrative failure. This is about a government that has lost control of one of the most fundamental responsibilities of the state, the secure detention of convicted criminals, and a justice secretary who thinks paper-based systems and casual dismissals constitute adequate explanations for releasing dangerous individuals into the community by mistake. Let us start with the facts, because they are damning enough without need for embellishment.
I won't do that, by the way.
Should you be able to opt for a jury trial? Or should that be dealt with by a...
That's an either way case. So that's the either way case. I'm asking about the other cases. Either way is clear, right? That's going to not jury.
Where should the threshold be? Brian says it should be at 3 years. He effectively says 3 years, I think, should be dealt with either by the magistrates or by a new division. And that's what I'm looking at.
You've changed your mind on this. You have changed your mind on this in the last week, right? Let's be straight. You've changed your mind on this. Why have you changed your mind?
You're asking a process question.
No, I'm not. I'm asking you.
No,
this is not no. Just to say, this is not a process question. This is about the right to a trial by jury. There's nothing process about this. This is about fundamental beliefs. You, I put it to you, the Justice Secretary, have changed your mind in the last week on whether that should be done in the vast, vast majority of cases. Why have you changed your mind?
David Lammy sat down with Susanna Reid on Good Morning Britain, and what should have been a routine ministerial interview turned into a masterclass in evasion, discomfort, and revelations that would be shocking if they were not so entirely predictable, given Labour's record in government thus far. Susanna pressed him on the fundamental question that any competent journalist would ask. Have there been further prisoners accidentally freed since your last statement on this issue? Lammy's answer was as revealing as it was disturbing. Yes, 2 remain at large. 2 prisoners who should be in custody are currently somewhere in the community because the Justice Secretary's department released them by mistake. Read that sentence again and consider what it means. These are not prisoners who escaped through tunnels or overpowered guards or exploited security weaknesses. These are prisoners who were deliberately released by prison authorities who made catastrophic errors in determining who should be freed. The prison system did not fail to contain them. The prison system actively expelled them through sheer incompetence. Susanna Reid then asked the obvious follow-up question that any member of the public would want answered. Are these two prisoners who remain at large violent or sexual offenders? This is not a complicated question. This is not an unreasonable inquiry. This is the most basic information that the Justice Secretary should have at his fingertips when discussing prisoners wrongly released into the community. David Lammy's response tells you everything you need to know about how seriously this government takes public safety. I am reassured that they are not. Reassured. Not certain, not confirmed, not verified. Reassured. This is a Justice Secretary who cannot even definitively state whether the prisoners his department mistakenly released are violent or sexual offenders, but he is reassured they are not. Based on what reassurance? From whom? Using what verification process? He did not say, and apparently did not think the public deserves to know. But the story gets worse because it turns out the two prisoners currently at large are merely the tip of an iceberg of incompetence that extends far deeper than Lammy initially admitted. When Lammy appeared on Sky News earlier the same day, he was asked how many prisoners had been wrongly released since he made a statement on the issue on the 11th of November. His initial answer was that there had been two wrongly released prisoners. That would be bad enough, representing two separate failures of basic administrative competence in a system that should have multiple safeguards to prevent exactly this kind of error. But then, later in the day, speaking to the BBC, Lammy clarified his earlier statement. There have been 12 mistaken releases since then. 2 are currently at large. 12 prisoners wrongly released. 12 separate incidents where the prison system, under David Lammy's oversight as Justice Secretary, released individuals who should have remained in custody. And Lammy's initial response when asked about this on Sky News was to say 2, referring only to those currently at large rather than the total number of mistaken releases. This is not merely incomplete information. This is actively misleading the public about the scale of the problem. Whether that misleading was intentional or whether Lammy genuinely did not understand the question being asked, neither interpretation reflects well on his competence as Justice Secretary. Think about what 12 wrongly released prisoners means in practical terms. 12 separate cases where prison staff processed release paperwork, where multiple layers of administrative checks presumably occurred, where computer systems or paper files were consulted, where decisions were made and implemented, and in every single case, someone got it catastrophically wrong. This is not a one-off administrative error that slipped through the cracks. This is systemic failure across multiple institutions, multiple occasions, multiple decision points. And the man responsible for overseeing the system sat on national television and tried to minimize the problem by initially citing only the number currently at large rather than the total number wrongly released. David Lammy's explanation for this cascade of failure is perhaps even more alarming than the failures themselves. Speaking to Sky News, he said there have been releases in error since I made that statement, but I want to convey that the trend this year is fortunately downwards. There are 2 people currently at large, and a prison system that is paper-based. Mistakes happen. Let us examine this excuse with the attention it deserves, because it reveals everything wrong with how Labour approaches governance and ministerial accountability. First, the claim that the trend this year is fortunately downwards. This is meant to be reassuring, a suggestion that things are improving and the problem is being brought under control. But the trend being downwards is meaningless when the baseline is so catastrophically high that any reduction still represents unacceptable failure. If you released 50 prisoners by mistake last year and only 12 this year, the trend is certainly downwards, but you are still releasing 12 prisoners by mistake. The appropriate number of prisoners wrongly released is 0. Not a declining number, not a trend in the right direction, 0. And anything above 0 represents failure that should result in immediate action to fix the systems that allowed it to happen. And second, and far more damningly, Lammy's excuse that the prison system is paper-based and mistakes happen. This is extraordinary on multiple levels. Lammy is simultaneously admitting that the prison system relies on outdated, inefficient, error-prone, paper-based processes and suggesting that this somehow excuses the mistakes that inevitably result. This is a cabinet minister, a member of the government that supposedly represents modern, competent, forward-thinking administration, throwing his hands up and saying, "The system is paper-based, so what do you expect?" This is not an explanation. This is an abdication of responsibility dressed up as acknowledgement of reality. If the prison system is paper-based, and that paper-based nature makes errors more likely, the obvious response is to modernize the system, implement digital record-keeping with proper safeguards, create redundant checking mechanisms that catch errors before prisoners are wrongly released. But Lammy's response suggests he views the paper-based nature of the system as an unchangeable fact of life, rather than a problem requiring urgent remedy. Mistakes happen. Yes, Minister, mistakes do happen. But when those mistakes involve releasing prisoners who should remain in custody, your job is to ensure systems exist that prevent those mistakes, not to shrug and cite paper-based administration as if that constitutes adequate explanation. The reaction to Lammy's interview reveals how transparent his evasions and excuses appeared to anyone watching. One viewer wrote on social media, "I just can't take David Lammy seriously as a human being." Another observed, "He looks so uncomfortable." These are not partisan attacks from opposition supporters looking to score cheap political points. These are reactions from members of the public watching a senior government minister squirm through an interview where he cannot adequately explain or justify his department's failures. When your performance is so poor that viewers question whether you can take you seriously as a human being, you have failed not merely as a minister, but as a communicator and defender of government policy. The interview was described as uncomfortable, and uncomfortable is precisely the word for what we witnessed. Lammy fidgeted, hesitated, provided incomplete answers that required later clarification, and generally presented the image of someone who knew he was defending the indefensible, but had no choice but to try anyway. This is what ministerial failure looks like when it meets journalistic scrutiny. A man who knows his department has failed catastrophically, who knows he cannot adequately explain or justify that failure, but must nonetheless appear on television and attempt to convince the public that everything is under control. Some viewers attempted to defend Lammy, suggesting the interview questions were poor or that Susanna Reid was engaging in right-wing tactics by describing the wrongly released prisoners as on the run. One viewer complained that Reid was becoming a liability for suggesting prisoners released by accident are on the run, arguing they are not on the run because they were released, rather than having escaped. This is semantic nonsense that misses the entire point. Whether these prisoners escaped or were wrongly released is irrelevant to the fundamental